You're listening to the Clear Creek Resources podcast from Clear Creek Community Church. To hear more, check out clearcreekresources.org.
Well, welcome you guys to our Clear Creek Resources podcast. We are in sort of a unique place. No, really a unique place. We're actually sitting in Jerusalem together after spending about 9 days in Jerusalem. Remind me, where exactly are we right now? How far away are we from?
So, I mean, if you hear the sounds of birds or maybe even some water or people talking, it's because we're at a hotel that's barely 400 yards. So think about 4 football fields, I think this would be west of the, what's known as the Jaffa Gate, which is a part of the old city of Jerusalem. So we're really a few good golf shots away from landing that ball right in the city, the old city of Jerusalem.
That's just one shot for Bryson.
Yeah, that's exactly. Just one shot for the real pros. But for hackers like me, it may take a couple. But think about that, 400 yards from the city, which Jesus went into, especially as we approach things like Holy Week and that and the other, his crucifixion, his resurrection. It's just 4 football fields away. That's where we're doing this podcast from. So as you said, Rachel, it is a very unique location for this pod today.
Yeah, so we want to go through not every detail of the trip we've gone on, but we want to hopefully have a discussion about what we've learned, what God has revealed to us, how this experience has shaped how we view the Bible. And hopefully it's a blessing to our brothers and sisters. So we're not going to go through every single day, but hopefully give a broad overview in what it means for our faith today. So I just want to ask all of you first. They've given us, so we have really good guides here who've been teaching us and walking with us throughout this trip. What is some just like really cool fact that you've learned from them? Because they are just spouting out things all the time. Like, well, this means this and this means this. Do you guys have one of those?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, mine, I don't even know if I would think of it as a fact, just that the geography has played such an important part of this trip for me to understand the Old Testament and the New Testament, and it's been wonderful. For me, we visited the city of Nazareth after we went to Mount Carmel. So we went to Mount Carmel one day, looked down in the valley of Jezreel, which is where we talk about Armageddon and the city of Megiddo. And then the next day, or 2 days later, we went to Nazareth, and we just walked up to this cliff, and we looked down, and we were on the other side of what we, again, think of as the valley where Armageddon will happen, or where it's symbolically represented as happening. And that's where Jesus grew up. And so that was amazing to me to think about Jesus of Nazareth. That is on the western side of the city that he grew up in. That blew my mind.
I think for me, one of my favorite facts I learned was when I was in college, we did an extended study of Nehemiah. And when we stood at the top overlooking Jerusalem at the city, one of the things our guide pointed out to us is right around the old city of David, part of the wall that Nehemiah built is still standing today, thousands of years later. And that just blew my mind.
Yeah, that's amazing. So one of the things that I just love, this is like no theological significance, I just thought it was fun, is when they told us that there are actually locust trees. So when they said, like, John the Baptist, you know, he was in the wilderness and he ate honey and locusts. Honey is actually more like a chocolate from the bark of a tree here. And then they're called locust trees, and it's more of a fruit. So he was really eating chocolate and fruit, which is one of those things that it doesn't matter, but it's, if you know, you know. It's that historical context and geographical context, like you're talking about, that you're like, oh, that actually is less weird than it seems like, and makes sense. So I just love learning those things. It just brings it to life.
Yeah, I'd say for me, pretty much what Aaron was saying, I think we've all said it too, pardon me, on this trip, is the proximity to things. So when we were on the Sea of Galilee, where it's a stone's throw. It feels like you could almost say literally a stone's throw, but it's not but a few miles from Nazareth, where Jesus was raised, to the shores of the Sea of Galilee, which is really just a big lake, y'all. It's not a sea, it's a big lake. They just call it the Sea of Galilee because it's like 16 miles long and ever so many miles wide. But it's that's where Jesus, when you read the Gospels, I mean, 90 5% of what you're reading is happening around the Sea of Galilee. And so Nazareth is where Jesus is raised, but when Jesus does his ministry, it's in this little town called Capernaum, and we got to be at Capernaum, and it's like saying most of the Bible happened between South Houston and Texas City. It's that kind of proximity. It's really crazy that all of it happens within this radius that is not very long, that you can walk to almost all of this stuff, and frankly, a nation that's 50 miles wide at its narrowest point and 300 miles long. So from people being from the state of Texas, where everything takes forever to get to, Israel and really the places that Jesus did ministry was incredibly compact. And so it's pretty easy for me to see why he gathered a lot of crowds, because all these people knew each other. It's like, hey man, he was over in Dickinson today, so all the League City people are showing up. Now he's shifting west towards Friendswood, so now the people from Alvin are coming in the League City, and the Dickinson people are joining in them, and so much so that he's got to get out on Galveston Bay to speak to people. I mean, that's basically what happened there. That to me was that was a learn. So that was a big learn. Helps me look at the Bible in a way to go, wow, this all happened really in a compact place.
Yeah, so that's actually a great segue to my next question, which is we could talk about a lot right here, but which part of this trip, or what is one thing that you experienced, or one place you were that really brought the Bible to life for you? That's what I hear you saying, is I can see it all. Like I'm sitting here on the Sea of Galilee, and I can see how this all happened. Yeah. So what are some other examples of that happening during this trip for you?
Yeah, I'm with Yancey on the Sea of Galilee. That was amazing to see that those are small towns of small populations, and then when they talk about thousands of people and the huge crowds, like you could see that would just encompass that whole area with people following Jesus. But for me, I say that because Yancey was getting emotional at the Sea of Galilee, and for me,
I sure was.
I was enjoying it, but when we got to Jerusalem, we got out and looked over the city for the first time, and that's the first time I got emotional on this trip. And really, I've told Rachel and Yancey and Jennefer already that, like, growing up doing and participating in the Stations of the Cross helped me, because we're looking over it and I was just imagining Jesus carrying his cross through that city and all the things that we were about to learn about as we entered the city. But just to stand over the city just made those final chapters of the Gospels come to life, because I couldn't believe that.
And so when you say Stations of the Cross, for people that haven't grown up with that don't know what that is.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, no. Can you briefly describe? You don't have to go through each station, but what does it generally mean when you say, hey, we went through the Stations of the Cross, for people that come from different traditions?
Yeah, I think there's 14 stations, and it's the methodical march from the time that Jesus is condemned to death by Pilate through the city of Jerusalem, ultimately to where he's crucified and buried. And so it's him falling. There's traditional elements to it, and then there's parts of that. The stations where it's actually, just straight out of the Bible that Simon, no, that's probably tradition, but it's really just the methodical progression from being condemned to the crucifixion.
And they literally have the numbers of the stations, like,
we
affixed to the wall. It says like 1. Here's station 2. Here's station 3.
Yeah,
and
they actually have the Stations of the Cross here too.
Which I was really surprised.
That's not even when you got emotional, but then we actually did it later.
Yeah, exactly.
And the road for pilgrims who come here have been doing it really for thousands of years, obviously 2,000 years. It's called the Via Dolorosa, or the Way of the Passion, the Way of Pain. And we highlight different parts of that when we do our Holy Week and things like that. But for those who grew up doing the stations, they go through each station. And so to be literally, and we keep saying literally, like, because here we are, literally in the city where those traditionally have been held, is overwhelming.
I think for me, sitting in the Garden of Gethsemane, I always imagined when the soldiers came to arrest Jesus. In my head, it's this dark place. He would have been taken by surprise. But when we actually sat in the garden, and you can see the gate that the soldiers would have come from, the garden's kind of down and the gate is up. Jesus would have clearly seen the torches of the soldiers from a distance coming for him. So it just changed the way that I viewed that. It was really powerful to sit there. And of course, we don't know exactly where in the garden he was, but from any of the points that we were, you can see that gate that the soldiers would have marched through, and he would have been prepared. He would have seen them coming and approaching him, and that was really incredibly meaningful.
So if you want to kind of get in your mind space what that maybe could have looked like, approximated, imagine being on the far side of the church office on the Egret Bay campus. Those of you almost all of y'all know where that is. So imagine being on the far side of that little office space and then looking up towards the distance at the children's building. And maybe, imagine it being 50 to 60 feet higher, and then seeing people come out of the children's building to walk all the way down to that kind of patio area on the office. That would have been what Jesus would have seen when the soldiers were coming for him. Now, you'd have to expand that quite a bit, but that's kind of like the look that you would have seen them coming, which was a surprise. I won't say for Rachel and Aaron, it was definitely a surprise to me, thinking them come out of that gate. Just amazing to just give life to that scene.
Oh, it is, yeah. Here comes my betrayer. I mean, you sort of think he's just saying that because he's Jesus and he knows. But
right.
He actually probably saw them coming.
Yeah.
Which that for me is one of the big takeaways from the trip is it's bringing scripture to life, because it all makes sense. Whenever it's that geographical context that you can say, oh, this is exactly why they're saying it, how they said it. Because for me, one of the things, there's a few examples, but one of them is just being on the Jordan near where Jesus was baptized. And after he's baptized, it says he goes to the wilderness. The Spirit takes him to the wilderness. And you can actually see there, okay, here's the Jordan where he's baptized in this river. And then actually there's the wilderness right next to him.
Absolutely.
So you can see exactly what that would look like from Jesus being baptized and going to the wilderness. And the wilderness, I'm sort of the same as you, Jen. When I picture things in my head, and for wilderness for me means, I don't know, like a flat desert with cacti. I don't know, like West Texas. That's the wilderness. But there are these huge hills just covered in rock. And so when I think about Jesus being tempted in the wilderness, now there's this picture, and it just brings it to life.
Yep.
It makes so much more sense of what the Bible is telling me.
It made a lot more sense that when it said Jesus didn't eat for 40 days, I mean, there is nothing living in that wilderness. There is not a plant. There is not an animal. There's rarely a water source. And so all of that part of his temptation made a lot more sense as well, too.
Lots of
There are a lot of rocks.
I did see a couple of camels, but you'd have to chase them down. And if you've been starving for 40 days, you'd probably, that's
There
some
were
high
camels.
bets.
Yeah.
I think also when we read the Psalms, and we read the Psalms where it says Psalms of Ascent, that's a literal meaning. It's literally when you're ascending to Jerusalem. So as you come into Jerusalem, you're going up from the seafloor, if you will, or sea level, I should say. You're going up 18 miles. 18 miles up. Well, we came up the new Jericho road, not the old Jericho road, but we went from Jericho up into Jerusalem, and it's like, imagine going skiing, and you got to get up the hill to the ski lifts and to the if you will, the ski resort. That's somewhat like it is coming into Jerusalem. You're going up the whole time. No matter what part of Israel you're in, you're always going up. So when they say, hey, we're going up to Jerusalem, even Reuben, who happened to be our guide, he's a Jewish man living here in Jerusalem, he said, we never say you're going to Jerusalem. We always say you're going up to Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. And so we have a whole section of Psalms, 120 or something to 130. 134, where the literal heading of them is Songs of Ascent, or the Psalms of Ascent. And it says, as I go up to Jerusalem, where does my help come from? Mm-hmm. I look up, and my help comes from the Lord. As the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds his people. I mean, that kind of language is a literal description of what's going on. So, Aaron, do you have something to add on to that?
Yeah, no, I love that. I read the Psalms of Ascent as we drove into Jerusalem, and then we read that one of the guides read one of them, and it was Psalm 133, and it says, it references the Mount Hermon, mm-hmm. Which is up where the Jordan River starts, which feeds all the way down to the Sea of Galilee, to the Dead Sea, on the eastern side of Israel. But then it mentions Mount Zion, and there's snow, and we saw snow on top of Mount Hermon. It talks about that's a cool place, and the dew that would be over Mount Zion. And it's like, if I was reading that without seeing it, I would have not had any context of that. Actually, it's a cooler, more northern spot that's significant, and then we're right here at Mount Zion in Jerusalem, so it was cool.
Yeah, so part of what has been so cool about this trip too is all of the history here, because one thing our guides have said over and over is, oh well, these walls are these are new walls. These are 500-year-old walls, so we're not even going to talk about them because they're so new. So that's how much history is here, which is just amazing, especially as Americans, because we come from really a new country. So what for you has been sort of the most interesting or unique experience just seeing history in front of you? Has there anything that struck you about that aspect of the trip?
That's a great question. I probably need to noodle on that a little bit longer. What I would say, one of those things is that being in Israel, and I want to be careful how I say this because, it's not everyone gets to go to Israel. 1% of people, Christians that I know of, would even get to go to Israel that I would think about. So we're privileged to be able to do it. But just to kind of bring back things to share with our own people at Clear Creek, for me, it's like, man, Jesus, being here brings more alight the truth that Jesus was a real person who lived amongst a real people in a real culture that had real different dynamics that I don't live in. I don't live in a city that's has an oppressor with the Romans who don't mind squashing any kind of rebellion. I don't live in a world where I have religious tensions against me because Jesus is not only the Messiah. That word's getting out, pressure's on him. I don't understand the tensions of, by the time that Jesus rode into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, there were 40,000 people usually around the city of David in Jerusalem. But by the time he rolls in, it's 6 times bigger. And that you have a lot of Jews coming into the political capital, if you will, where it's putting the Romans on edge and all that stuff. And if we've walked through the streets of Jerusalem, we know that Jerusalem's been destroyed 10 or so times, right? But those streets are still narrow, and I just can't imagine the tinderbox, the tensions that the Romans had and the Jewish religious authorities had, because they don't want it to blow up. So Jesus is walking into a tinderbox, and yet as we work through places like the Garden of Gethsemane, the Mount of Olives, we even went to the traditional place of his crucifixion and resurrection known as the Holy Sepulchre. I mean, it really was divinely ordained, because Jesus, you would think, could have been snuffed out at any time, but he knew when his time was, when it was going to be. So for me, I'm sorry it's rather long-winded, I feel the historicity of it because you finally get to be in the city. It's like for Texans that grow up and say they've always heard of the Alamo. Well, that's another thing. I mean, Aaron's from San Antonio, but when you finally sit in front of the Alamo, it changes things a little bit. When they say, "Oh, here were the long barracks. Here's where the walls used to be. Here's maybe where Davy Crockett was killed." And when you're a little kid and you've grown up with those stories and it's real, it just helps you see things like, "Oh, this actually was an historical event with really people who really lived and died." That's all the more true. We get to see Pontius Pilate's road that he built. We get to go to Caesarea Philippi, or rather Caesarea by the sea, and no one believed that scholars didn't believe that Pilate was a real person until they found a stone with it says that this was built by Pontius Pilate. And that's the kind of stuff that gets us going, because as Christians we believe that the Bible's true, just because almost on full face of it all. But to see the history and the archaeology reinforce that is just powerful. It felt like he got the right answers on the test, and then someone actually shows you, here's how the test was, how it was made. You're like, this, I am believing the right thing, kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, that's good. I mean, I think just to add a small piece, that the tinderbox that you mentioned is so exactly right. That the Romans built their tower, their fortress, right off, adjacent to the Temple Mount area. I mean, and so it was right there. If anything was going to happen, they were going to put it out, so much so that they were within feet of the Temple Mount.
Yeah.
I think one of the neatest things that we saw was, we've always learned that, that that the temple was destroyed in AD 70, but they have recently uncovered part of the road where our guide was explaining to us, because I believe it was limestone, and they said it was a porous rock, that how they destroyed the temple is they just set things on fire.
The walls of the temple.
The walls of the temple, to destroy the integrity of the rock. And they have uncovered a place where the Romans, just a few days after that, began to throw the rocks down on one of the roads that Pontius Pilate built. And you can see how that road has now been destroyed. And they left tons of these enormous rocks sitting there for pilgrims today to come and see. So it was just brought another historical event to life, to actually see the road and to see those giant stones thrown off of the top of the temple.
Yeah, I think they said this is a snapshot from 2,000 years ago,
Yes.
essentially.
Which, if you read Matthew 24, Jesus tells them, this is going to happen. The temple is going to be destroyed. Not a stone will be left. And you literally see the stones there. They're too big to move. Well, I guess they could have moved.
They're enormous.
They just left them there. And so when Rachel says it was a snapshot, it's like, yep, see, it's exactly what Jesus said, and it's exactly what came to pass.
And one of my favorite parts of this week was being able to pray at the Western Wall, which is the wall of the temple that's still there, of the Second Temple.
The outer
wall.
core, the outer wall that
right.
protects the temple.
Yeah, so we got to walk in there and pray. And for me, that was one of those emotional moments. And it's not because I think there's anything special or magical about praying at that wall. It's really it's contrary to that. It's knowing, though, the history of the temple, that is where God's presence was for God's people, and that Jesus is the true temple, and that I don't actually have to be there. I don't have to be in the place behind that wall where God's presence is because of Jesus, the true temple. I can be in League City, Texas, and I can pray, and God's presence is with me. And so the connecting with the history of God's people and his presence, and then knowing what Jesus did so that we can all experience that. We don't have to be at the wall, even while being at the wall where all of God's people have been. That was just this really amazing moment for me.
Explain to our Clear Creekers out there just a little bit about what happened. How did you get there? What did it look like? What did you have to do? Can we all pray together there? Like, give us a sense about like what was it like for you to be a part of that? Because you can't just go up and pray to the wall. You can't just walk up there. You can't just wear like your t-shirt and your flip-flops. I mean, there's
I think that to me, and that's again, it's sort of being a part of a different cultural context than we're used to, and I appreciated that. If you're a woman, your shoulders have to be covered. You cannot wear shorts. Short shorts if you're a man or a woman. It's a holy place for the people here, and so you have to treat it as such. And then, like Yancey is, alluding to, there's a separate section for men and for women, and so we really were experiencing some of the laws that the Jewish people worshipped under. They're still doing that today, and that's why. So we're like participating in these Jewish laws and customs as we worship, and knowing at the same time that Jesus has freed us from so much of that to this fulfilled worship and presence of Him, which I loved. Sort of seeing both of those things together at the same time.
Several of the women, as Rachel and I were walking away after praying, we noticed several of the women were walking backwards. And when we asked our guide, Reuben, he said that's just yet another way they show respect to the Lord. They're not gonna, they keep their face to the wall, which to them represents the presence of the Lord, and they walk backwards, keeping their face to the wall the entire time as a sign of respect to the Lord. And so that was a really interesting and meaningful thing to observe as well.
Yeah, I think for me, for the history, are you going to say anything more about the wall?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. For the history, just a different take on it. We visited Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found in the late 40s, which a lot of people consider to be one of the most important archaeological finds of the past century. And one of the big takeaways from that, we got to see some of those scrolls, and we got to see copies of some of those scrolls, is that it pushed back the age of our oldest copy of the Old Testament by 1,000 years. So prior to that, we had copies that were, about 1,000 to maybe 1,200 AD, which is great. But the scrolls that they found when there's pushback on, well, maybe this isn't really what the Old Testament was like because it's been copied over so many years. When they found those scrolls, they realized that the copying was excellent, 99% accurate. I mean, what we had in 1000 AD is what was there even in 100 BC, 200 BC, which some of those scrolls date back to, which is just a massive...
It's amazing.
Yeah, it was so good.
So what that does for us, especially for people like, you, Aaron, and Jennefer, and Rachel, when you guys teach, because y'all are all teachers of whether it's how to study the Bible or women of the Word or so on and so forth. I mean, we can tell people with confidence, listen, because that's one of the questions a lot of people have, not just seekers, but Christians, like, how can I trust the Bible? How can I trust that this isn't just a book made by men who over the years have corrupted it? Here we have academic, really, evidence of here. Your Old Testament was that's we're just talking page numbers, way more pages in the Old than the New, right? The Old Testament, as you said, our latest dating was 1200 AD. We find these old pots, I should say, in
a cave.
Cave number 4 in Qumran, and open it up only to find these exact same scriptures written 1,000 years earlier, and they're virtually the same. This is why, and y'all say this in your classes, and it'd be good for our listeners to hear, the Bible is the most academically attested document in all of historicity for its accuracy and for its legitimacy and its genuineness. There's not even, take Aristotle, take Ptolemy, take the Punic Wars written by, I can't remember the guy who wrote it all of a sudden, but any historical document of antiquity, the Bible outstrips them by far, and that's frankly why we went to the ground zero at Qumran, and then we come to Jerusalem to the to the museum there, and they have this huge museum just dedicated to that find because it's so...
The Shrine of the Book.
The Shrine of the Book. It's the thing shaped as the jar that they found it in, and
brilliant.
It's so significant to them, and frankly to us. We believe that those Old Testament scriptures ultimately point to Jesus.
Yeah.
So.
And in that, they found every book of the Old Testament in that discovery except for Esther. And then they also found additional writings that have shed light on the Second Temple Jewish period. But they found basically every book of the Old Testament, which is amazing.
Another neat fact, when were they written? Written usually, some of these documents were written while Jesus was walking the planet.
Yeah.
So these were Essenes. Jesus knew of the Essenes. Fantastic stuff.
I think
that one last point is the handwriting. I've always wondered, the handwriting on these is brilliant. It's clean, it's clear, it's brilliant. These
Carl Garcia would have really ruined it had he been an Essene. Sorry, Carl.
I would have too.
Yeah, no, but when these were professional copyists, they were doing their best, and you can see how good their work was on papyrus and parchment and different things. So,
I think just one more thing that has really hit me this week about just being in this place that has so much history is, from just the depth of the depravity of human beings here. Because it is a beautiful city, and we have just been able to see so much hope of the Christian faith here. But man, we have seen, whether you're talking about ancient, pagan ruins, where they were worshiping and sacrificing in pretty horrific ways, or you're talking about the suffering and the wars that have happened from Jesus's time to even now, hearing about the wars that are still going on, to walking through what Jesus suffered. I'm just reminded, and the Holocaust Museum too. We walked through the Holocaust Museum here. I'm just reminded that human beings really are fallen. That you see that everywhere you look. This is a city, it's called the City of Peace, but there's so much war and devastation and destruction and sin here. And to me, that's been devastating, but in a way that this is where I want to be when I'm thinking through those things, because then we also keep walking through the steps of Jesus. And I know as a Christian what happens in the end. My hope is because Jesus was here. Like Yancey was saying, the historicity of that's true, that he walked these steps and he lived and he died and he was raised again, and that he's coming back to make all things new. I mean, you can just see the whole picture here, which has been, I think, a really good gift for me.
Yeah.
I think probably what I would end up for me, this is going to sound oxymoronish probably, like I've enjoyed this. It's been a super great time for me, and we can continue to talk if we need to talk. I kind of want to piggyback off of what Rachel said. I've really come to the end of this thinking I didn't need to be here. I didn't need this. And the key word's need. I didn't need this because let's just let the people know, give them a good sense of where we've gone. Okay, so we've been to the Sea of Galilee. So we've been to Capernaum, where Jesus lived during his ministry, probably staying with Peter. We've been to what's traditionally known as Peter's house, and there's good evidence that probably was his house. We've been to Mount Carmel, where Elijah fought the prophets of Baal. We've been to Caesarea Philippi and Caesarea by the Sea. Caesarea by the Sea is where Paul was imprisoned. We've been, then when we got to Jerusalem, and I'm skipping stuff, it's trying to hit the high notes. Been to the Mount of Olives. We've been to the Garden of Gethsemane. We've been to the Mount of Crucifixion. We've been to the place where it's traditionally held that he was resurrected and is buried. We've even been to Joseph Arimathea's tomb. We've been all the way down to the Dead Sea. So we've been to the city of David. Last night we were in the upper room, the place where the upper room was, a place that we talk about.
It's where Pentecost happened.
Where Pentecost happened.
Yeah.
And we've been around the place where they talked about the ascension on the Mount of Olives, right before Jesus says, Acts 1:8, and you'll receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you. So we've been to all of these things. And really, to be honest, the thing that's one of the things that's bubbled up in my own soul is that I did not have to be here, because there's shrines everywhere you go. Every place is a shrine. So the upper room, the Holy of Holies, the Mount of Olives, everyone's got a church built on these things, that's from the 1300s or 15th century, whatever. And I'm thinking it's not about the shrine, it's about the reality of what happened 2,000 years ago. And you don't have to be in Israel to figure that stuff out. If anything, what I've been impressed with is I'm more grateful of the new covenant. I mean, I'm grateful that Jesus is the better high priest, and he's the better temple, and he's the better sacrifice, and he's the better people of God. And while it's been a joy to be at all these places, I'm probably more taken that Jesus is beyond it. I said one time in a sermon, I'm not as concerned with Jesus coming back to reclaim a 50-mile wide strip of land that's 300 miles long. I'm ready for him to come back and show his sovereignty over all the world, and have holiness as the waters cover the land, and the new heavens and the new earth. And all of the stuff that we've seen here has been good, but they're all fence posts and road signs to a better kingdom that comes with a better king. So it's been good, but it's just reminded me how good the new covenant is. Even seeing all these old boys with their prayer tassels on each corner of 613, because it represents all the laws of the Old Testament, and the things they can't eat and the things they can't do. And we've been freed up by the new covenant. So if anything, I'll be grateful to sit my feet back down in the League City, Friendswood, Dickinson area and go, let's just keep opening up the scriptures and finding Jesus, because he's here with us now, not in some geographic location.
Yeah, I think there's, that's exactly right. And so I would say, as important as geography has become to me on this trip, it's not that you have to, it's just that when you see that he went from Capernaum to wherever, just know that they were describing a movement, and it was either east to west or north to south, and it was just, that's why it's there. It's not the most important part of the gospel account, but it just kind of gives clarity of why they're describing it happened that way. And
they weren't making it up.
And they weren't making it up. And that's really what I was going to say, is just sort of the apologetic of being here is when you see how close all these places were, and that the people that lived where Jesus lived, which is Capernaum and Galilee and up by the Sea of Galilee, they said they would take their pilgrimage down to Jerusalem for sure, maybe once a year, maybe as many times as for 3 events a year. But that would take about 2 weeks to walk down there. So, I mean, these people are walking in communities. I mean, this stuff, I'm just going to say, I always view Paul's statement in the resurrection as, it either happened or it didn't. If Jesus isn't raised from the dead, that we're still in our sins, and we are above all most to be pitied, because we're living in light of something that didn't happen, and he's saying it did happen. But when you're here and you see these things, how close all this stuff is, you can't make this stuff up. And I mean, that's not an academic statement. And that's just my personal takeaway is like, they couldn't have made it up. All these people knew each other in these communities, and it's right here, and it's not a big area.
Yeah, I mean, so 1 Corinthians 15:14 says, and if Christ has not been raised, then our preaching is in vain, and your faith is in vain. Our faith is founded in history. And walking here, you can see it. You know, my faith has been strengthened because of it. But really, it's really just the reality of what that does for us in Christ that matters, and we experience that everywhere. We experience that in Lake City, in Friendswood, in Dickinson, even in Clear Lake, and that's really the beauty of being here is knowing that. So I'm grateful for the chance to be here. Thank you for you guys for just sharing with us a little bit. We could obviously, y'all can tell, we could talk about this for a long time.
Absolutely.
But we would mostly just bore you. But I'm grateful for y'all's thoughts and reflections, and may it be a blessing to our church, and would our church be a people who are founded in the truth of what happened here in this place, and spread it all across the world.
Amen.
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 Thanks, you guys.
Hey, thanks for checking out this video. If you haven't yet, make sure that you hit subscribe down below and check out ClearCreekResources.org, where we have videos, books, and sermons on there, as well as our audio podcast. Thanks for watching.